And we're on. This is 3 Yards per Carry. I'm Alfredo Arteaga. Simon Clancy is here. Chris Kaufman is here. And this is our first round reaction show. And we'll look ahead to the second round because we won't be with you for the rest of the weekend, but we will come back next week to recap the entire draft. But tonight, we're going to devote our time to what happened in the first round and a slight look ahead to tonight, which should be fun. They have 4 picks tonight. They're -1 in the Chris Johnson trade. We'll talk about that as well. Again, if you want to interact with us, and now is a better time than any, okay? You should go over to our Discord, and to do that, you go to discord.gg/onlyfins. Join on a desktop, avoid the Apple upcharges, $2.99 read-only, $4.99 all access. I put a link to the Discord on every single one of our promotions, and I promise I'm going to be done with the promotions in a second. But there's still time to get the Low Red Zone draft book. And how do they do that, Simon?
They can email me, and it's right there, thelowredzone@gmail.com. I just want to say about OnlyFins, actually. Barry Jackson reported last night that Kaden Proctor was one of the few 30 visits that was kept a secret and wasn't reported anywhere. Not strictly true, Barry, because you'd have found it on OnlyFins.
Yes. Yes,
that is correct.
And we're gonna get
that is a fact. I mean,
and we're gonna start right there. We're watching this thing, and first of all, let me tell you my analysis of all the mock drafts. I wish I could say that they were all wrong or they were all right, but they were just kind of average. I did the numbers on it. Ruben Bain was a 58% chance he was going to be there. Caleb Downs was a 38% chance. Now, the only one that they absolutely got egregiously wrong, and that's across the board, was Spencer Fano, because he had a 91% chance of being there based on 46 aggregate mock drafts. And Spencer Fano,
I think his fall was down to Marino's back, though. Do you know what I mean? Or his rise, where it was down to Marino's back, I think.
So, as far as their performance, just average. So, just any other year. But it gets to 11, and they make a trade with the Dallas Cowboys. They gain 2 5s, and they move down 1 spot. The Dallas Cowboys take Caleb Downs. And I spoke to somebody close to the Dallas Cowboys, and he told me he was certain that the move was to take Ruben Bain and that Miami would take Caleb Downs. But then Miami is on the clock and take Kaden Proctor, tackle of Alabama. Your thoughts on that whole process, Simon?
I mean, people won't know our WhatsApp group. Obviously, the 3 of us that have been in this WhatsApp chat for like 15 years or whatever. And as it was playing out, and as people were passing on certain players, and you always get a player that's getting bumped down just because of what happens. And we said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, you only needs 1 or 2 outliers in the top 10, and somebody amazing is going to fall. And so the 3 of us were texting each other back and just like, oh my God, Downs or Bain are going to be there. And I think, look, get Downs out of the way first. For me, he's comfortably the best player in the draft. I bored people that the force multiplier thing, can play multiple roles, snap, down to down, game to game. That's all fine, right? For a position that I think has a level of importance that is way more important than people talk about these days. And you have to look at the top defense in the league by kind of EPA per play to see they all have a player like Caleb Downs. Baltimore, Kyle Hamilton, Detroit with Brian Branch, Arizona with Buda Baker, Jalen Petrie in Houston, Derwin James with the Chargers, right? So I think it were, and just given what we know and what we said about Half being our higher status defensive coordinator, so he knows the players because he knows them through. Downs wasn't there; it was 2019, but he knows the coaches, and the coaches they obviously will have communicated probably more so than with any of the other college coaches. Just knowing how much he values the safety position, and we talked about it with Xavier McKinney. I just thought to give up to essentially just trade down and get 2 5s to miss out on what I thought was the best player in the draft. I just hope that doesn't come back to haunt us, as history always does, in terms of, Downs is getting measured up for that gold jacket. And here we are talking about, 2 5th rounders who probably don't even make the team. That's the kind of the parlay, right? I felt disappointed with the pick, actually. And I was just a bit, and I get it, I think. I get what they want to do. I thought it was. Look, I have some concerns. Right, you take a guy 12th overall and you move his entrenched college position. That to me is a concern, no matter how you slice it. Right, he's clearly not going to play left tackle in the NFL because Patrick Paul's there. So number one. Number two is I assume they think he's going to be the long-term replacement for Austin Jackson, which makes sense, right? Except that he's never ever played on the right side, as we know. He's never started on the right side in high school, never started on the right side in college. Opposite foot, opposite hand, all of those things can be a significant challenge for players, right? He's clearly starting at left guard to start with. I can't see any other scenario than that, which, you know, affords him the opportunity to sit between Paul and Brew. But again, he's never played guard. He's also 6'7". You know, that is a big guard, right? That's really tall for a guard, especially with a 6'1" quarterback behind you. I think he's a guard, right? I think, they'll obviously Chris want to see him at right tackle, right? They obviously think he's the replacement there. But if they view him as a guard long term, which I do, why wouldn't you take Vega Ioane, who's just a better player? And I understand there are more limits on his positional value and versatility. But I also argue that the reason to take a player 12th overall shouldn't be because you like the fact that he's versatile. That to me is a thing. The stuff on his tape that I really like. I thought he was a fascinating prospect. I thought he was really bad for the first portion of last season. You go back to watch the Florida State game, and he was awful against Mandel Desir. He's just inconsistent, and that's the thing. The stuff on his tape where he doesn't play to his power. The times when he does use his power, he's just phenomenal. He just kill people. Do you know what I mean? He just talks people. He just shoves people all over the place. He can explode off the ball. Other times, he's the last person off the ball by like a country mile. The work ethic stuff off the field bothers me. The Nick Saban stuff about he's not a self-starter bothers me. The fact he was 400 pounds bothers me. The fact that one of the first things he said in the interview was no state taxes. The fact that, he's prone to not being in the facility, going home, eating, putting on weight, all of that sort of stuff, that bothers me. Look, we've parroted this, Chris, haven't we, since they took over, that they do what they're going to say they do, and they turn around and do it. And they said they were, and then we don't like it. And then and this one we didn't like. I don't like the pick. I think his ceiling could be Roger Saffold, who I think is one of the more underrated players of the last 10 years, but I think his floor is Mekhi Becton. And I just think that it's just a fascinating risk proposition from Sullivan, who doesn't strike me as a risk guy. He's a baby. He's 20 years old. And we know they're building for 2028 because he said that as well. That's what they told Albert Breer when the Jalen Waddle trade happened. So maybe they move him to left guard. He turns into Peter Skoronski and everything's fine. Maybe in a year's time, he goes out to right tackle and he becomes a really good right tackle. He gives up too many soft shoulders, short corners, Chris. And, I hope he becomes the player they think he is. I was just a bit disappointed with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll say this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that I turned on my mic. So if I accuse any single player of being unprepared, you could throw this back on my face. I'll be brief with mine, and then we could get Chris in here to talk about Kaden Proctor in a more positive light. I had a complete meltdown last night, and when I woke up this morning, I was still angry, and I'll tell you why. For it seemed like almost 1,000 years, we were bitching about Chris Grier just taking mulligans. And I look at Kaden Proctor as essentially a 2027 draft pick. It's another first-round pick for 2027. I think he's the right tackle in 2027. Mm-hmm. I'm not as optimistic as some are at him at guard. Everything that I watch, maybe it's because he's playing tackle, but most of what I've watched of him, he comes out of his stance way too high.
And too slow.
Yes, so it's not going to translate pretty well for this scheme inside. And mostly I'm upset because Caleb Downs was comfortably my second best player on the board. Sonny Styles was my best player in the draft. So, you could give or take. It doesn't matter. It's two great players from Ohio State.
The guard thing, just before while we talk about that, I know his athletic testing was decent, his explosive testing was decent, but I never look at him and think, oh, this is a guy I just want to see pulling from left guard out behind the right tackle. That doesn't strike me as what he Do you know what I mean? And unless Bobby Slowik is completely changing the scheme, and we're going to run more gap power with inside, just no outside zone at all, and just kind of gap power inside zone. I do wonder about
that. Is a conversation to watch out for, by the way, a going forward thing. Because remember, we also have Patrick Paul at left tackle, and we drafted Jonas Avaiania, and John Eric Sullivan invoked Jonas Avaiania's name, actually, which surprised me during the press conference. He said, we have, obviously, you talked about the versatility and his ability, Proctor's ability to play 4 positions. And he said, but obviously we have Brew, we have Pat Paul, we have Jonas Avaiania. And he said that was what he said. So, this is, Jonas Avaiania is going to factor in. It doesn't mean he's going to start, and nobody should have ever assumed that after what he did his rookie year. But when you start to put it together, because you look at the profile of Patrick Paul, this is not a Charlie Heck, who they signed in free agency as far as the profile goes, and the profile of Jonas Avaiania and the profile now of Kaden Proctor. You're starting to see a theme here. So going forward, be on the lookout for exactly what that's going to schematically going to look like.
Yeah, and to finish up, it's basically about who was there. Passing on Caleb Downs to me is almost egregious since he's such a great player. Ruben Bain set college records and had one of the better seasons any edge player has ever had in college football this past season. And if you're really projecting Kaden Proctor as a guard, the Penn State kid, I think, was a better player. So, yeah, I was underwhelmed by the move. And
look, it also he's the right tackle though. They can't just think that he's a guard, because otherwise,
they don't think he's a guard. They think he's a right tackle. They think he's Austin Jackson's replacement.
You cannot, in good conscience, look at him and go, "Yeah, he's better than Ioana." He isn't at all.
Yeah, and finally, it's about where you draft these guys, to which city. And Miami's a terrible place to bring in a guy who's a bit unmotivated. To quote Nick Saban, and Nick Saban was worse. Nick Saban said worse things about him on the broadcast last night. But I'll bring in Chris now to give us the more positive spin on Kaden Proctor.
Well, I mean, first off, this isn't my first rodeo or any of our first rodeo with the draft. And if you get too much into, Mel Kiper circa 2025 about Shedeur Sanders, which is to say that you get too obsessive with your guy and the fact that your guy wasn't taken, then you're never going to enjoy a draft for the rest of your life, because your team almost never takes your guy. I mean, that's a real thing. That's a fact. You almost have to bucket these things and say, okay, I do have a guy, because we do so much research and because we do so much evaluation. Yes, I do have conviction, just like anybody else who applies themselves in this way. But I'm almost never going to get that. And that's just a statistical fact, right? Is you're almost never going to get your guy, and then sometimes you do get your guy, and it's like it turns out to not even be a great player. So I think that we have to bucket that and turn it into, this is not about Caleb Downs, this is not about Ruben Bain, both of whom I wanted more than Kaden Proctor for sure, both of whom I was disappointed we passed on. This is about, did they get a good football player? Did they get a good guy? Now, as far as versatility, I do recognize, like Simon said, he hasn't played those other positions, right? They talk about other positions, but he hasn't played them. He hasn't played on the right side. However, everybody around him, whether it is, Nick Saban, who brought it up, at the same time that Nick Saban was, and I thought that what he said about Kaden Proctor's like weight and stuff like that, A, was dated, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but B, was a little bit lighter touch than I think a lot of people make of it. He brought up his ability to play guard. So if you're talking about he's too high to play guard, or he's not a strong guard, you've got Nick Saban saying that he'll be good at guard. You've got Duke Manyweather, who has been working with him for years, who believes that he will be a right tackle, but also that he can play guard, and that he's got conviction in that. So the people around Kaden Proctor believe that he can play guard, and that matters because they see him, up close and more often than the rest of us do. I mean, I just was going through John Eric Sullivan's press conference, and, we're learning about his process. One thing we're learning is that he does exactly what he says he's going to do, right? Can we get that out of the way? He said quarterback comes first. We build from the inside out. He said fast may get slow, but big doesn't get small, right? He invoked bully ball, that he wants to build a bully. What did he just do? And the first thing they did in free agency was quarterback comes first, doesn't it? And they get Malik Willis. And the first thing they do in the draft is they build from the inside out. They build the lines. They build, a big doesn't get small guy, a bully. That this is what he does. He follows through on what he says, and and we gotta. I mean, not that we were surprised, but I mean, it's something to pay attention to. But these are the words that he's used, and these are the things that he said during his press conference. Unique, rare, can play 4 spots, athletic traits for a man his size through the roof. There wasn't another one in the draft like him. Unique, can play all 4 spots, high level, unique, rare, height, weight, speed, outlier. There's not many like him. Unique player. We can build around this guy for years. Thrilled with the pick. No apologies. We have the, he talked about that. They have the resources at Bama. He actually kind of took a shot at Nick Saban here, a veiled shot at Nick Saban with this statement, because he talked about how they have resources at Bama who have worked with him recently and said that they had no problem with his weight, including he really brought to mind a specific strength coach who he said is a hard ass about weight. And he never worried about Kaden Proctor's weight. Here's some other things that he said that would affect you is the guy has 270 pounds of lean body mass. He's not a fat guy. He leads the conditioning runs. That's what he said. So he's talking to people at Bama. Again, unique. He used the word unique probably about 17 times. He rare. The guy has an edge, reeks of confidence, bully ball, build from the inside out. He invoked all of these things, and we're learning about John Eric Sullivan that, one, yes, he's going to be a Planet Theory guy at times, like clearly, like he's looking for unique rarities. And
that's important today as well when it comes to those edge players.
And that is, yes, and these are things to keep in mind for tonight.
Last night was a statement, I think, on Zion Young and Gabe Akers, those big Jaysean Barham, those big physical run through your face kind of guys. Sorry to interrupt. I think
no, it's okay. And so we're learning about like how he thinks and what he thinks. So clearly there is a maturity issue, and you brought up some of the things that kind of will bend your, will kind of raise your eyebrow about him. I thought it was weird to bring up the state tax thing in your introduction to the Dolphins. The fact that Ty Simpson said that his play was called Goonies because the team knows him as well, never mind. I think that, there's a lot of things, and Nick Saban invoked the 400-pound thing, which happened when he was young. And there's also some scouts had talked about where I believe he was going to transfer back to Iowa, but then he came back to Alabama. Now, Kaden Proctor did say that there were some things going on with his family at that time. He's not a rich man, or his family is not a rich family. So I think that there were some aspects of that to it, but you're learning that he's kind of a Planet Theory guy. Maybe he can sometimes forgive maturity issues. That doesn't mean he's going to forgive medical issues like Chris Greer would. This isn't about dented cans necessarily. And then there's also the process. He talked specifically a few times about how the coaches said one thing, the analytics said another thing. We, in the personnel department said another thing. We came together and we found that we were all saying the same thing. about Kaden Proctor, so that kind of gives you a process clue about how they do these things. So, he does what he says he's going to do. He clearly pays attention to Planet Theory guys. He is very forgiving of young immature players being young immature players to a degree. And then he's, from a process standpoint, the analytics are in the room clearly, because he invoked them several times during it. So I think that teaches you as you're going forward how he thinks and what he does. And I think that at the end of the day, we want them to build the trenches. We want them to build a bully. They just grabbed the biggest Planet Theory bully for the offensive line, the guy that they think is going to play on the right side for Austin Jackson for many, many years. And it's hard to be mad at that. It's hard to be mad in particular. I look at, when it comes to an offensive line prospect, and I find that if I'm on the other side, if I'm taking the other side of the argument against guys like Duke Manyweather and Greg Cosell and Lance Zierlein and Brandon Thorne, basically you name it who's who of guys that you don't want to disagree with about offensive linemen. You got to be nervous about your position if you're taking the other side of the argument against them. And Greg Cosell said that there's probably only 2 tackles that he reviewed on tape that he felt like he could trust on third down, to not need help on third down at the NFL level. And Kaden Proctor was one of those 2 guys, so, and Spencer Fano was not, so I think that we have to pay attention to that. I think we have to pay attention to the fact that, he talked about the 270 pounds of lean body mass, because I think that's a big tell about what they're going to do or how they think about these guys. And so, yeah, I think that he's going to be an interesting player for the Miami Dolphins at right tackle, and a bully, as they call it. And so, it's going to be fun to see. And the one thing I'll finish with is that it's, to invoke again the rare, unique thing. Most college players, 99% of college players, when you're evaluating them, you watch them most of the time playing, kind of trash players. The good college players that you're evaluating, they're playing trash. And they're doing really good, and they're doing really good things. And then they play somebody a little bit better, and then it's, maybe it's not an elite thing that they do, but it's still very good. And then they play somebody that's a little bit better, and then it's, just kind of okay. And then sometimes they're playing really good players, and then it's bad, and that's the way it goes. Like, as the quality of the player they're facing gets better, they get less productive. They do a little bit worse. This is one of those opposite cases with Kaden Proctor. When he plays the bad ones, there are some mistakes out there, but the better the player he went against, the better he looked, and the more of a compelling NFL prospect he looked. He made Keldrick Falk look undraftable at times. So I think that you go through it, and that speaks again to the whole maturity thing. And so I think that we're learning that they can take a young guy who was only barely 20 years old when the season started, and he got embarrassed by at Florida State, which he did, and say, yeah, that's not how he's going to be when he's 24. And that's the bottom line.
The NBA playoffs are finally here, and Underdog is the best place to get in on all the action. Playing on Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite player will go higher or lower on stats like points, rebounds, steals, and more. Get your picks right, and you can win up to 5,000 times your cash. I know I've been telling you all week that Jason Tatum, taking him higher on points in this series because it's a great matchup, is so far 1-1, but I'm still doing it for the rest of this series. So download the app today and use the promo code 3YARDS to score $50 in bonus entries when you play your first $5. That's promo code 3YARDS. The number 3 yards. Underdog, make picks, win money.
Be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Offer not valid in Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. In New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369.
And we're back. The draft moved on just because they made a trade and moved down to 12 and took Kaden Proctor, and all hell broke loose briefly on Twitter. It didn't mean that they suspended taking players for the rest of the day, but we were looking forward to 30. But then they popped on right away onto your screen as they're on the clock at 27 because they evidently made a trade. They traded 30 and 90 for 27 and 138. On the face, I'll go first here. On the face of it, I don't like the trade because I believe that top 100 picks are, and I put some evidence of that. Some guy did an analysis of where Hall of Famers and all pros get drafted, and it's just a litany of first rounds, second rounds, and third rounds, and very few fourth, fifth, sixth, and sevenths. So top 100 picks are extremely important. So I didn't like the trade. Love the player in Chris Johnson. Absolutely love the player in Chris Johnson. But it seems like this morning there's a little bit more evidence that the Bills were going to take Chris Johnson, and Miami had pretty good intel to move ahead of them and take him. I'm still a little bit queasy about giving up a top 100 pick for a team that needs pretty much everything, but I do love the player. Simon.
Yeah, I don't mind the top 100 pick. If they only had 1 third-round pick and they'd given it up, I'd have an issue. But they had 4, so to me, that's really it's much ado about nothing for me. And you get back a 4th rounder anyway, so I don't have an issue with that. I really like Johnson. I think he's a really, really good player, and I think I was slightly tempered by the fact that I was still pissed off about Proctor, that I wasn't as excited about Johnson. I've got to say, he was the 4th rated corner on my board, and Colton Hood was the 3rd. What I did find interesting, and try not to be moaning Minnie, what I did find interesting was the statement that Sullivan made about how he was really keen to see Johnson against those SEC players. And I just thought, well, you've got an SEC player in Colton Hood, like a really good SEC player. Why wouldn't you just take him? And then people were like talking about, well, the science. Somebody was like, well, Johnson's way taller, he's way bigger. And he's like, well, actually, Chris Johnson is 6'0", 193. Colton Hood is 5'1", 193. So he's 3/8 of an inch smaller. So literally about that much smaller. He's faster. And he played in the SEC, which Sully mentioned. But look, I'm pontificating, prevaricating unfairly because I think Johnson's a really good player. I think it's interesting actually because I think he's best suited to zone or off man. So that kind of tells you stylistically what Half is looking to do. I think his size, his movement skills. I know he turned down a number of Power 4, like big Power 4 offers last season. He didn't give up a touchdown last year. He gave up just 2 receptions of 20-plus yards. I think he's a really, really savvy. He's got really good football intelligence. I really like him. 4 penalties in 1,738 snaps is pretty amazing. And I just think when you watch the tape, you just can't help but be excited by how smooth he is as a mover. The back pedal is really crisp. His feet close to the floor. Everything's really well balanced. He can click and close superbly. He's really flawless as a technician. And he's a bit thin-framed, maybe. But I just love what he does with his eyes. His eye work in zone is excellent. He drives on the ball. He's got great closing speed, anticipatory. He can be smothering at the catch point. He narrows throwing windows down the field on the outside, which I love to see. You know, guys that just drive receivers to the sideline to just eliminate the space that the quarterback can drop the ball in. And on top of that, 2 things: he's one of the best run defenders in the class. 4% career missed tackle rate, and he's also one of the best special teamers in the class. I think he's got like 500 plus special team snaps. He's a really, really good gunner. So yeah, I just thought he was a 1st rounder on my board, and I thought he might fall into round 2, but it was clear that I think it was clear that Buffalo were looking very hard at taking him. And like I said, if we had 1 third round pick and we gave it up to get back a 4th, I'd feel a bit more annoyed about it. But Chris, when you got 4 to give up 1 to get a player that you have a massive conviction on, and I think the most important part of this is the reaction of Jeff Hafley on the video when Hafley is celebrating the selection. He looks super pumped, but also I don't know if you've heard the phone call as well. When Haf gets on the phone, it's like it's Christmas Day, and he keeps telling him how excited he is to get him down there, and he loves everything about him, and yada yada yada. So, yeah, I think he's a really intelligent player, and I think Haf really values that, especially in corners. So, yeah, I can't argue with the pick at all. I think Chris Johnson's I just think he's going to be a really sound, solid, fundamentally solid team leader, team captain, just great kid off the field. Yeah, I like the pick a lot.
You know what he is, Simon? You know what he is? Just real quick. You know what he is? He's the Jordan Phillips of corners. Like, when the Jordan Phillips pick, as a defensive tackle, like it feels like the Jordan Phillips type pick as a corner, except this happened in the late first round, as opposed to the late stages of the draft. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah. I was just gonna say that when I was doing my notes on all these corners, I did like Colton Hood a little bit better than Chris Johnson, but I'm completely fine with it. If you've been listening to my Q&A shows, I did 3 mocks, and in 2 of the 3 mocks, I took Chris Johnson at 30, and the other one I took Colton Hood. so because TJ Parker wasn't making to any of my mocks, and we'll talk about that in a second. But when I was writing my notes on Chris Johnson on the con side, I wrote played in a group of 5 school. I don't think that's enough to ding a player. I really don't. Anybody who talks about, he played at San Diego State, so he's playing against, complete bums. No, just watch the film. Like, football is still football, and especially at cornerback. At cornerback, you're still going to see things moving fast at you the same way you're going to see it pretty much at every single level. So I absolutely love the pick. A little queasy about the trade, but, Simon talked me a little bit off the ledge. I love the player. Your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, there's some read-throughs that I think that I feel are really important there. And Simon talked about the SEC thing. Within the context of what John Eric Sullivan was saying about that is actually he was saying a lot of what you just said, Alf, which is that actually one of the strongest moments of that press conference was the way that John Eric Sullivan, when he said, what was the exact way he said that he said it? He said, somebody mentioned, the conference that he plays in, whatever. Like, that was literally how he said it. He said whatever about the conference that Chris Johnson plays in. So we're learning about John Eric Sullivan. He says it's about traits. It's about traits. He doesn't care about the conference. He doesn't care about the conference that he plays in. When he talked about wanting to see him up against those SEC boys, it's specific to the combine. He was talking about seeing him run next to those guys in the combine, seeing him measure next to those guys at the combine, those SEC guys at the combine. And that's where it was validating that he ran real fast, jumped real high. I think those were the words that John Eric Sullivan said. So, again, we're learning about this new regime and how they operate. So we're learning planet theory is in the room. That versatility is in the room. He evoked versatility in both players. He said Kaden Proctor, 4 positions. He said Chris Johnson plays 3. Yeah. He says that he plays nickel. He plays corner. And he said we could even play him at safety if we want, but we're probably not going to. And so, like, he talks about versatility. He talks about bully ball. He talks about the physicality of Chris Johnson. You brought up a good point, Simon, that he's one of the better run defenders as a corner in the draft. So we're talking about physicality, bully ball. We're talking about versatility. Planet Theory is in the rooms, clearly cares about those measurements that happened at the combine, felt that they were validating. We're learning that analytics is in the room. Analytics is a strong voice in the process. So going forward, I think that these are the things that you take from it. I go back to some of the things that Hafley detailed, and remember, Hafley is a corner guy. Like, he started his career coaching the corners. This is his baby. I think that corners is to Jeff Hafley what running backs probably are to Mike McDaniel. If you go back in time a little bit, and that can go one of 2 ways. It can go like Hafley, I'm sure, has confidence that he can find the diamonds in the rough at the corner position, and that he can coach them up, but also that he can identify the cream of the crop at the top and with the corners. And that was the message that I was getting from them about Chris Johnson. They brought up his age, only 21 years old. Like, you know, that's and again, flag that and keep it in your mind.
It's a very important flag, that, I think.
Yes.
We talked about that with Keontae Scott.
Look how young Kaden Proctor is. He can't even order a beer to celebrate his drafting.
Yeah, and something I posted on our Discord is, you know, I was told, you know, put away your fantasies of taking Keontae Scott, because this regime really cares about age.
Yeah, at that position. But that position in particular is one that has about the same shelf life as a running back, you know, almost. So it's so the age does matter at that position. So I think of Jeff Hafley. He described sort of the framework of how he evaluates the corners in 3 levels. You know, how are you at the line of scrimmage? How are you in the middle breaks? And how are you in the deep section of the field? And I think what you're building a picture of is, you know, between the guys that they acquired in free agent, bunch of lotto tickets, bunch of, you know, kind of minimum type players, but you see guys that have length and some size to be physical at the line of scrimmage, and then be factors, you know, kind of in the deep sections of the field. I think that Chris Johnson is more of a guy that plays a little, is comfortable playing off and doing some things that are kind of rare, which is playing really well from an off position, breaking on the football, breaking on those intermediate routes, but also turning around and being able to play multiple positions. I think that that's the thing that might be hard for them to find in the Walmart bins. You know, the Walmart DVD bins, you know, so I think that that's where they went for the kind of the premium traits for Chris Johnson. So again, we're learning how they think, what they value, and what their process is. And I thought all of it was very telling, including the pick of Chris Johnson.
And as we move on here and finish out the show, we still have day 2 coming up here tonight, and Dolphins have 43, 75, 87, and 94. So ammunition is not going to be a problem. 43 is kind of interesting to me because they could go any which way, and if you look at the board, man, that thing is rich. I have very few surprises that, you know, in the first round, but one of them is I really felt like TJ Parker was going to be drafted by now, and he's still on the board. You got to figure he's going to be one of the first guys off the board on night 2. But I'm really looking at him and just hoping and praying that he makes it to 43. But the only thing I'll add here is a little bit of soft intel. I would look at that last pick, 94, and earmark it. And I think that they could go running back there as a surprise. But I don't know if you have any other intel for this day, Simon, or what you're looking forward to and which player you have earmarked for 43, but your thoughts, day 2.
No intel, but a load of good players on the board, you know, whether that's Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. Is Johnson going to play outside? So therefore, does that mean Avion Terrell, also very young, 21 years old? You know, they love Denzel Boston, clearly. You know, he came in on a 30. They spent time with him at Washington Pro Day. They interviewed him at the Combine. You know, young player, Caden McDonald, still only 20, maybe 21, was a 30 visit guy. Zion Young, just what we talked about 20 minutes ago in terms of the run through your face, that kind of stuff. You know, Young is 21. No, Young is just over 22. Gabe Ackus is 21 and a half. You know, so it's those kind of players. To me, you know, personally, I'd be looking at a couple of guys, whether that I like Parker, I like AJ Halsey, the safety from LSU. I love Jeremy Bernard. He's one of my favorite players in the draft from Alabama. He's only 21 and a half. You know, you can just do so much with it. Jeremy Bernard is the offensive skill position version of everything that they talk about in terms of versatility. You can do so much with Bernard. I think Jeremy Bernard would be, but you look at it. They've got Cassius Howard. They're probably not going to draft Howard. Well, maybe they will actually. I mean, I don't know. Who is there? Besontis, C.J. Allen, Anthony Hill, Stowers, Brandon Cisse, Chris Brazzell, Akers, Jacob Rodriguez, the guard Besontis and Pregnon are both there. Kristen Miller, who we know they like. Your guy Keontae Scott, Golday. There's a lot of good players that are still there, on the board. So I don't know. I suspect they'll go probably receiver, maybe safety. And I think that if Denzel Boston's on the board, I don't necessarily, Chris, see them passing on him. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think keep an eye on AJ Halsey, because passing on Caleb Downs is, I think that they're aware that that's a choice, right? They did it for a reason, and part of the reason, the unpleasant reason that we might think about, is if you look at the run that happened at offensive tackle and on offensive line through the first round, had they waited for that number 30 pick to get a guy, they wouldn't have even gotten Caleb Lomu. like that's not even where they were, where it was at that point. So AJ Halsey as a guy, you're gonna make Jeff Hafley feel a lot better about passing on Caleb Downs if he knows that he's also getting a super smart football intelligence guy in AJ Halsey. We took him at the 30 pick in our 3 yards per carry mock draft. So, I would have an eye on him at wide receiver. I think you got to watch out for Dejon Stribling, at wide receiver. I think that he's a phenomenal player. He's extremely physical. He is a height, weight, speed guy. I think that's something to really watch out for. Denzel Boston will probably be gone by the time we get there. So at the edge players, amongst the edge players, I think yes, you do keep an eye on TJ Parker, on Gabe Haggis, and Zion Young. Although Zion Young again might be off the board by that time. He seems like he's one of the guys that will go among the first picks in this day 2 area. So yeah, and one guy to keep in mind that wouldn't really surprise me is Anthony Hill. Anthony Hill, the linebacker. One of the linebackers that I really love in this draft. So and the guards are still there. If we think that ultimately the vision for Kaden Proctor is not going to be at guard, in my opinion. I think it's to replace Austin Jackson. Emmanuel Pregnon is still there. Chase Besantis is still there, and I think that is a an interesting dynamic. They you wrote, Simon, I believe that they might steer toward Besantis over Pregnon because of the age thing, and we just talked about the age thing being important to them. So keep an eye there. I think that this is going to be an interesting day 2. And I note that they filled some holes in the draft order between the trade that they did to go from 11 to 12, and then moving back up and trading 90 for 138. They and there was a big hole. There was a big hole between, what they could do in the 5th round, and then kind of getting all the way to the end of the 7th round. And I think that they're really acquiring a lot of picks in that range. And I think that they might find that to be an important range, to still get guys that are quote unquote draftable, because by the time you get to, the late stages of the draft, you are not really picking up guys that you generally, often not picking up guys that you considered purely draftable. You're picking up your priorities that you don't want to wait until UDFA. All
right, and I think we could call it right there. It's going to be a fun night. They got plenty of picks, plenty of ammunition, a lot of good players on the board. And we shall see how it shakes out. If you want to interact with us, now, as I said earlier on the show, now's as good a time as any. Join our Discord. That's at discord.gg/OnlyFins. $2.99 read only, $4.99 all access. I put a link to that promo on every single one of our promotions on Twitter. and Blue Sky. So click on it and join us over there. I'm pretty certain we're going to be live posting the draft. At least I will. I'll be making comments on players as they come off the board tonight. This is actually my favorite night, and I love it when they have a lot of ammo. So this should be fun tonight.
Yeah, we should get 4 good players tonight. That's what you're hoping for. Come away with 4 good, sound, solid players who make decent contributions, who can be, you know, is there a star in there? Great, but let's just get 4 good football players. I think they'll be young. I think they'll be traitsy, and I think they'll hit their kind of height, weight, speed.
And they might come from any conference.
Yeah.
yes, but they will not be 25 years old. I think we're safe. I safely say that.
I don't think they'll take a kid that's over 23, frankly.
Yeah,
because I think that because of the Waddle factor. What they told Albert Breer, they want young kids who are they can grow with them and are going to be, you know, when we get to 2028, when we're supposed to be good, they're only going to be 24, 25 years old. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. You know, and actually, Simon, the one name that I kept thinking about, you know, when we see that they forgive maybe a little bit of the maturity issue, but then it also brings up the medical issue is wide receiver at Chris Bell. You know, you brought up some maturity issues there, but you want to talk about a height, weight, speed kind of outlier type of player, that a little bit of maturity issues, but, you know,
maturity.
Yeah, so
ridiculous.
Yeah, and so if those things are entering the chat, then you know, Chris Bell is also 21 years old right now, and so it's something. I had been thinking like on that because of maturity issues, but this is what we're learning is they can be forgiving to a degree of that.
Yeah. All right, and we're going to call it right there. The next time we talk to you, we will have a full draft class that we will break down on this show. Maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday. We shall see, but we will let you know. But that's it. Enjoy tonight. See you next week.